Alicia speaking. Thank you, Minister Mullen, for sharing with us what Queensland is doing to shape an inclusive future. We now welcome our first panel to the stage. The topic they will discuss is shaping the possibilities for the future, disability reforms. Allow me to introduce our panelists. Elizabeth Binacci, Senior Executive Director, Strategic Policy and Legislation, Seniors and Disability Services, Department of Child Safety, Seniors and Disability Services. Luke Mansfield, Group Manager, Disability Reforms and Royal Commission, Department of Social Services. Dr. Sharon Boyce, Chair, Queensland Disability Advisory Council and Queenslanders with Disability Network Board. And Jeff Rowe, the CEO, Age and Disability Advocacy Australia. And the facilitator for this panel is none other than the one and only Michelle Moss, CEO of QDN.
Thank you, Alicia. Very wonderful description and welcome, and a very good morning to you all. And I too would just like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to pay my respects to people from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander who are in the room today. Sharon, who is also joining us, has been a little bit held up in traffic on the way down from the Toowoomba and on the range. She said there was a bit of fog holding things up this morning. So as she gets here, I know she's going to join us. So yes, it is my very great pleasure to welcome you all here today, those of you in the room and to people online, and to our great panel that we have. So just a visual description for me, I am a middle-aged woman as well, and I have a short blonde bob, and I'm wearing a very bright pink dress today. And I will take my glasses on and off. So Liz, we go to you first. So here as a representative for the Queensland Department of Child Safety, Seniors and Disability Services, and as Minister said in her opening address, that it is a very quiet time in disability and disability policy, and I know that the department has been very busy in work around the reforms. So, wondering if you can talk to us about what has been happening, the plan for the reforms in Queensland, and how this reform agenda is going to make a difference now and into the future.
Thanks, Michelle. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to start
I think so. We'll go with that.
Thank you. Good, thank you. Morning, everyone. I'll try again. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we're meeting today, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend my respects as well to everyone with lived experience of disability and the unique insights that you bring to the conversation today. I am a middle-aged woman with black glasses, and I'm wearing a black and white spotty dress with blonde hair. Be a bit blonder on Tuesday when I get to the hairdresser. And I've officially reached the age where I also need to take my glasses on and off, so I will be doing the same, Michelle. So thank you very much for having me this morning. As Michelle said, there's a lot happening in relation to disability reform at the moment, which is a really exciting opportunity. And I feel very privileged to be part of the department that's working to try and improve outcomes for people with disability in Queensland. So I thought I'd give you just a little bit of information about some of the things that we're working on, and the Minister stole a bit of my thunder in her speech, but she's the Minister, so she's allowed to do that. But as you all know, we released our Queensland Disability Reform Framework on the 31st of July, and that pulled together our Queensland Government approach to how we respond to the Disability Royal Commission and the NDIS review. I'm really excited about having such a cohesive and structured approach to how we will move forward on reforms out of those major inquiries, and to really take the opportunity to think right at the beginning of that journey about what is it that we actually want to achieve for people with disability in Queensland, and how can we make sure that the decisions that we make have that objective in mind each and every time we're making a decision. So there are 3 primary outcomes out of that framework. And I did bring some notes because I had a bad dream last night that I was going to forget them all, so I brought them just in case I did. But the first is around elevating the rights, voices and participation of people with disability. And we want to talk a little bit more today about how we're planning to engage on that co-design process in Queensland. The second then is ensuring Queenslanders with disability can access high quality and safe services. And a big component of that is looking at our contribution under the NDIS, how the scheme is operating, and working very closely with our Commonwealth colleagues, Luke, who's here with us here today, on how we can reform the scheme to make sure that people can access the services they need when they need them. And the third is around ensuring strong structures to drive outcomes for Queenslanders with disability. So how do we actually get better at making sure that we have people with disability, the disability community and our sector partners at the table with us making those decisions and making sure that we have the information that we need from those people in the negotiations with other jurisdictions and with the Commonwealth Government. Across then those areas of reform, we've got some cross-cutting priorities that again need to be front and centre of all of the decisions that we're making. We need to focus on improving outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Queenslanders with disability. We would need to really think about how we're working across service systems and boundaries to ensure better coordination and delivery of policy design and services. We are conscious of the need to address intersectional disadvantage and improve access and service equity in rural and remote communities. So that's a bit of an outline of the things that we have at the forefront of our mind that we're very focused on in this reform journey. As the Minister spoke to, the Queensland Government has now released the Disability Royal Commission response, and all disability ministers have now agreed that there will be a formal response to the NDIS review by the end of the year. So we envisage that our reform framework will be an evolving document and something that we continue to iterate as those reform processes move forward. The other things that I just thought I would like to share with you today was a little bit of information about how we think we might take the co-design process forward. So the Queensland Government has had a strong commitment to co-design in all of the work that we do. And if you've had a chance to have a look at the Disability Reform Framework, you will see that there's a commitment there to the development of a Queensland co-design and engagement strategy. QDN have been engaged by the department to develop that for us. And the Queensland Government has committed funding to implementation of that strategy. So the plan for us was about being ready when we had our reform framework ready to release and our Disability Royal Commission response ready to release, to be ready to start that intensive implementation planning in a co-designed way. So we expect that we will release that strategy in the coming weeks, and that's been a co-design process led by QDN, and many of you will have been involved in that process. And that will hopefully set us on a really good path around how we take the reforms forward in partnership together. The only other thing that I was going to speak just very briefly to is that, of course, we've talked a lot about the reform journey, but of course the obligations and commitments under Australia's disability strategy and our Queensland Disability Plan will also feature very heavily in that work that Queensland is focused on taking forward. So I might leave it there. Thanks, Michelle.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Liz. And appreciate you giving that overview and perspective. And as you talked about, the Commonwealth is a very important partner in the work of implementing the reforms across the Royal Commission and the NDIS review. And we're really pleased to have you with us today, Luke, to give us that Commonwealth's perspective and the plan for implementation and how that work's going to link with Queensland, and to talk us through what that looks like and what the approach is. So welcome, Luke.
Thanks very much, Michelle, and really great to be here today at this really important conference, and thanks to QDN and the Queensland Government for the opportunity. As a visual description of myself, I'm a man in my 40s and have short brown hair and glasses and a beard. I donned a maroon tie because I knew I was coming to Queensland today, and didn't want to get beaten up if I wore a blue tie. It's great to be able to talk about the work that the Australian Government is doing, much of which has been acknowledged by the Minister and by Liz, is being done together with the Queensland Government and other state and territory governments across the country. So I'll paint a bit of a picture around some of the things that are happening within the Commonwealth Government and the focus areas. And I would like to start with the Disability Royal Commission. I acknowledge, and the government acknowledges, the nearly 10,000 people that had been brave enough to come forward and express their experiences to the Royal Commission. And that was very difficult for many people. And the final report, especially Volume 1 and 3, which recounted many of those experiences and also the extent and nature of harm, was incredibly sobering and frankly distressing to read. And I know it means a lot to people with disability in this room and across the community that there is strong action by all governments to shift so that there is no violence, abuse, neglect and exploitation of people with disability across our community. In its initial response to the Royal Commission, the Australian Government accepted in principle 130 of the recommendations within its primary or shared responsibility. What this means is that reform is happening now, starting right now, to respond to the majority of the Royal Commission's recommendations. And a lot of that will be done with state and territory governments, but also, of course, in partnership with people with disability right across Australia. There's been initial investments made across a number of key areas to support implementation. This is focused on safeguarding, including better safeguarding for women and girls with disability, on top of significant additional investments in bolstering the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission, on upholding rights, including modernisation of the Disability Discrimination Act and a new disability advocacy program, on promoting inclusion and accessibility, including investments in changing community attitudes at a grassroots level and making all government communications more accessible. Improving access to jobs and employment is, of course, a very strong feature, including a new disability employment services program and a Centre of Excellence for Disability Employment, which I'll talk about shortly, and supporting First Nations people with disability, starting with work on the design of a shared partnership forum to guide future action. Our immediate next steps will be to work closely with the disability community and other governments to determine the best way forward in terms of implementation of those recommendations, and indeed unpacking how reform will happen across the community and the sequencing of that reform. As has already been mentioned, there's an awful lot of reform happening, and we acknowledge the need to ensure that we are closely working with people with disability to define how that reform goes forward and what it looks like. Australia's disability strategy will continue to be the way that we collectively drive national reform around disability, and all governments have commenced a review of that strategy to make sure it picks up the findings of the Royal Commission. And there's a public consultation that's started now, and we would absolutely encourage everyone to participate in telling us how we can make the strategy better. On the NDIS, as has been already discussed, there's a commitment to respond to the NDIS review by the end of the year. But as an initial response, there's obviously a lot of work already underway, with the Prime Minister, Premiers and First Ministers already agreeing in December last year that governments will work together to implement legislative and other changes to the scheme. And that work is well underway with the NDIS bill before Parliament right now, and investments of over $118 million over 2 years to support design work across a whole range of areas, including the participant experience and budget setting, improved home and living options, early practice childhood supports, and improving ways to access and pay for supports through the NDIS. All of this is being progressed in partnership with people with disability, and a whole range of co-design working groups have been established to support that. There is also, as the Minister mentioned, work happening around establishing some additional supports which were described by the review as foundational supports outside the NDIS. We know this is important because there's 3.5 million Australians with disability outside the scheme. And so we're working together with states and territories to design what that looks like. And we know that there's a need to focus in a couple of key areas. So a range of supports will focus on building the capacity of people with disability and their families to fully participate in the community and make their own decisions and advocate on issues that are important to them, like having access to trusted information and peer support, and tools to help enable supported decision making and assistance to find relevant services. Then there'll be some targeted supports that will focus in particular areas and on particular groups with disability who are not accessing the NDIS. So we're currently preparing a range of material to support the next step of engagement, building on what Queensland has already done here, to unpack what those supports can and should look like around the design. And we're keen to hear from Queenslanders with disability and other stakeholders on how to get that right. On employment, and I'll finish after this, on employment, we know that people with disability have an enormous amount of wealth and experience and skills that they can bring to the table to any employer, but too many are not getting that opportunity. And so the Australian Government is implementing a new specialist disability employment program which will start from 1 July 2025. It will assist more people with disability with their employment and career goals through expanded eligibility, with an estimated 15,000 additional people with disability able to voluntarily access that program each year. And that will be backed by a Disability Employment Centre of Excellence that will focus on building the capacity of employment service providers and staff, including around disability awareness, human rights, cultural competency, and customised employment and employer engagement. There's also ongoing work around improving the pathways from supported employment into open employment, including through structural reform of the supported employment sector. I hope this gives a little bit of a sense of some of the many things that are going on across the country. I probably spend more time with Liz than I do some of my own teams because of the connected nature of the work. And the Australian Government looks forward to continuing to engage with the disability community here in Queensland so that we can continue to drive improvements and change and hopefully a more inclusive Australia where there's lots of possibilities for people with disability. So thanks, Michelle.
Thank you, Luke. And thank you for sharing that overview of the Commonwealth and all the work that is happening. And I know that partnership between the state and Commonwealth is really important, and how we progress the work. Now, Sharon, welcome.
Well, thank you.
And great to have you here. And Sharon, I know, and Luke spoke a little bit about the people with disability who contributed their stories and experiences to the Disability Royal Commission. We know that recently has been a challenging time for people with disability and families, and the sector around, I guess, the responses to the reforms, but also the work that is ahead, because we know that receiving the response and the report is just the beginning, and there has been such incredible work to get here, and incredible effort and incredible heartache from people. So how do we prepare today for some of those challenges and opportunities for tomorrow? Because the future does hold a whole range of opportunities for change and for real and meaningful change. So really keen to hear your perspective, Sharon, and particularly that role of people with disability and the voice of people with disability.
Thanks, Michelle, and I'm really looking forward to today. Sorry I missed the first part of it. Our travel from Toowoomba was crazy with fog, etc., but we made it, and that's good. And I'm really excited about this conference, and just the title of it says what Michelle's just summarised, the possibilities and the opportunities to create inclusion and moving forward. And before I forget, I should mention that I'm a white woman with blue eyes. I use in a wheelchair. I'm wearing bright pink and orangey colours, matching Michelle. We didn't even talk about clothes. And I guess I'm around 50. So yeah, I noticed Luke put his age in there, so better do that. And I guess in this spot today, I am the chairperson of QDAC, the Queensland Disability Advisory Council. I hold lots of other hats, and I really loved Luke's summary of the federal perspective, and I know the Queensland perspective and the work that Liz and the team and from the Minister down have just been working so hard in this space. And we have so many things going on that I often feel like we need a guidebook for all the acronyms that are being invented, and there's a whole lot of new ones with the new employment stuff. I was just thinking that as you were talking about all of those issues. But I guess where we're here today and what we've sort of heard with the responses from the government for the Disability Royal Commission, for a person with disability, and the feedback and the feeling within the networks of people who have disability, carers, families, it was very disappointing that it took so long. That was probably the first point. Why did it have to take so long when people had put, their heart and soul into exploring, sharing some of the really, horrible things that have happened to them? And the emotion that was floating around then and now, I think, is something that really shapes how we make decisions, why we make decisions, and what is important to share back to the Minister. And I think that all of those sorts of things are where, as QDAC, our job is to advise the Minister and to really look at what sort of things are important. And I love the work that we're doing and have been doing on foundational supports. It's something that's going to carry people who are not receiving things from the NDIS or that the NDIS isn't going to support. We'll be able to do that with our foundational supports. But what are they? How do we do it best? How do we discover what those things are? And that engagement with the community is, I think, what's incredibly important. We want to hear the genuine voice. We want everybody to have the chance to have an equal say in how that might work. We really do believe in co-design, and I think I can honestly say that we can demonstrate it every day. And I work a lot across all those areas of the NDIA with my other hat as one of the members of the Independent Advisory Council to the NDIA. We talk a lot about co-design and the processes are happening, but I love the fact that I've been a member of QDN for so long. We've always done co-design, and Queensland Government alongside QDN has been demonstrating it, especially within this area. I guess a good example of that is the way that we listen to everybody on the ground. There's so many different types of disability. We don't just look at one. When you look at physical disability, you look at the outside of a person and you think, oh, well, if we did this, it might work. It doesn't always work like that, and particularly with hidden disability, we need to really look at all the different levels of that in order to look at what we're doing, what we're shaping, and what really is going to be going forward. When we look at a whole framework of things that are going to be supporting, we need to make sure that we're listening and embedding every voice into that area. I hate how my phone goes off, and I hate using notes, and I've only got a few, but I loved how Luke's just seemed to stay on, and I was thinking, when I'm presenting, I'm going to make sure that I keep touching it, but you forget when you're up here. So, sorry if I've got to do that. I just sort of think that we've got to really maintain that energy and maybe even the feelings of we want to get onto this right now. We've waited long enough. We want to have our say, but we want to be able to do something that really is going to make a difference into the future. And this is our chance to really imagine the possibilities. How do we feel about education? What are the issues in that area? How do we do that best? And I know as an educator, some of the scariest things are the issues that are happening from every different angle. Parents of kids with disability who have some great ideas and love the special school idea. People with the idea of full inclusive education, and what does that mean? How do we listen to all those voices and put all of those things together in order to move forward to get a great outcome, to be able to showcase the best life for people with disability in Queensland? We want to make sure too that we are really looking at the Australian Disability Strategy. We are really making sure that we live that and live those ideals. We spent many, many hours refining that, making sure that it was going to really help shape and create a pathway for the future for people with disability to really live an inclusive life. And for communities to support that, for government to support that, and people with disability to feel confident and happy and have a chance to link with employment, community, in fact, every area of society. We need to look too at the whole overarching legal frameworks, but then it has to be more than that. It has to be about lived life, possibilities, and chances for us to actually use all of the different areas of our lives that make a difference for us, for our families, for our community, and then look at how we can share that information with the minister, with government, with each other, in order to form, I guess, an approach to creating an inclusive life for people with disabilities across the Queensland, where I believe we could actually showcase some absolutely amazing things within foundational supports, within our framework, our disability reform framework, and overall with our lived lives. So thank you.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you for sharing your perspective. And I think, as Luke has picked up by wearing his Queensland coloured tie, we are very proud of the work that we have been doing in Queensland. We know that we have been leading the way across Australia in terms of the engagement across the sector. And it is about how we've been working together, people with disability, families and carers, and the disability advocacy organisations and providers to ensure that we are in a good place to be able to move into this next phase. And Jeff, I know that you have been working in this space in terms of reforms in the aged care field, and have lived the Aged Care Royal Commission and the experiences and lessons from that. And I think we wanted to hear from you today about some of those insights and lessons learnt and things that we should be thinking about as the disability community who's moving into that next period of our work around reforms from a Royal Commission.
Thanks, Michelle. Sorry. Thanks, Michelle. I should start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land and paying my respects to elders past, present and emerging. A visual description. Thanks, Luke. You've been a real help. I was going to say, I was going to describe myself as a 30-year-old and thought that I'd only be telling half the story if I did that. So I'm actually a past middle-aged man. I'm a man in his 60s with grey hair, a beard, wearing black pants, a brightly coloured shirt and a grey suit, and also a band-aid on my ear, having visited the dermatologist this morning, who decided that she'd take a little bit from me just to add to the description this morning. I was telling her how I needed to describe myself and she had a solution. The Aged Care Royal Commission, the final report was released about 3 years ago. It comprised 148 recommendations, the majority of which were accepted by the Commonwealth Government, by the then Commonwealth Government. There were a few that weren't, but they were a minority. And the Aged Care Royal Commission was interesting in that the two commissioners didn't agree on all things, and so they made some separate recommendations regarding structures that would support the new system. Interestingly, 3 years down the track, I'd love to say the aged care system's fixed. There's not a problem with it, and we're all really, really, really happy. Unfortunately, it's not quite the truth, but if you talk to a lot of people out in the community, they think that the Royal Commission was years ago and that government will have sorted it by now. I continue to go out to public meetings where I'm hearing the same sort of horrific stories that we heard when the Royal Commission was occurring, and these things have happened in the last month, in the last 2 months, in the last week. So one of the challenges, I think, as you go forward is how do you keep the message alive? How do you make sure that the community knows that we're not there yet? It's really important to celebrate the wins and look for within the aged care system, there have been some wins. But the first 3 recommendations were very foundational, and one of the things that both commissioners found is that human rights didn't feature in aged care. We've been talking for a long time about older people being required to check in their rights when they check into aged care. So the first recommendation was we need a new Aged Care Act, and that Aged Care Act should be based on human rights. 3 years down the road, we're working on it. We're not there yet. And indeed, there's been some real polarisation between providers and users of aged care and the organisations that support users of aged care. Somehow or other, providers seem to think that the delivery of human rights is going to send them broke. I'm not quite sure what their definition of human rights is. Human rights is about talking to people, it's about people having a say, people's voice being heard. Unfortunately, in aged care, the service provider sector is very vocal and is a very powerful lobby group. And we've seen at the federal level that government has become polarised with the opposition not supporting some of the things proposed in the new legislation. What does that mean for the disability sector? I think one of our learnings has been that any response, any plan has to be bipartisan. that you have to be talking to both parties in government or beyond both parties, crossbenchers as well, because governments change. I mean, the current federal government is not the federal government who commissioned the Royal Commission. They're not the government that accepted the recommendations. So really, really important that you are talking to and engaging both sides of government. One of the things early on, I heard a person talking about how long it takes to implement findings from Royal Commissions. Their research suggested that it took an average of 9 years to roll out the benefits of a Royal Commission. So, on that basis, for aged care, we're a third way there. For you guys, potentially you're celebrating the arrival of the Games in Queensland around the time that you're celebrating, the finalisation of the rollout. It's a generalisation, but I guess, while it's really important that we have lots of energy, we need to see it as a marathon, not a sprint. We need to be strategic about, of the recommendations, what are the ones that we want to focus on in the next 3 years? What are the ones that are the most important for people with a disability? What are the recommendations that can wait a little longer? One of the things that, talking from an advocacy perspective, there was a recommendation 106, which I'm quite proud to say came out of my evidence to the Aged Care Royal Commission, which was saying that government needed to have a significant investment, increased investment in advocacy services. A key message that came out with the Royal Commission was older people aren't safe. So we joined the dots and we came up with a narrative that says, some of these reforms are going to take a long time. If you invest in advocacy immediately, advocacy provides a protection and a voice for the older person in the system. So that was our message to government. We met with the Prime Minister's Department, the Treasury Department, Health and Aged Care, Attorney General, the shadows of all of those. We'd talk to anyone who would listen to say, this is really important, you need to prioritise it. We also did some media work around that, and I guess, as we go forward, part of keeping that community understanding that the disability issues that were raised in the Royal Commission aren't finalised, aren't finished, aren't fixed, is that you need to have that ongoing engagement more broadly. If you can work together, I guess I've painted, perhaps a little sadly, that there's a polarisation within aged care between the consumer side of the sector and the provider side. I think there are areas where we work together, but there are areas that we can't work together. And I think that you've got to figure out what are the sticking points. I think, for disability, human rights have been part of the landscape for a long time, and it would be unthinkable that we can't sort of be pushing to have a rights-based service. But in aged care, it's something that people are really struggling with. We do, from time to time, say, you need to look at the disability sector. They haven't gone broke, they haven't fallen over, the world hasn't ended. Keep the dialogue open, have a plan, know what your priorities are, and have a really loud voice, which is probably a silly thing to say to the disability sector. I think that's one of the things that
especially to this room.
Especially to this
and
room.
This virtual room as well.
And the virtual room as well. Yeah, look, I've been around the sector long enough to know. Don't be disheartened that things take longer than you'd hope and you wish. Things do happen. You just need to keep the story, the narrative going.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. And I think some important messages in there, because we know that this is a long journey, and it is such an incredible time for Queensland, as Jeff alluded to, and we are going to be talking today about Brisbane 2032 and the Olympic and Paralympic Games, as well as the reforms and what that means for Queensland and for Queenslanders with disability, our families and the sector, and how do we engage and bring the community along on that journey. So knowing that we are all here for the long haul, and I know many in this room have been part of the pre-NDIS journey to get us in the last 10 years, in the last decade, of those reforms. So interested in each of the speakers to share with us as we finish up a key insight or action that you would like people to take away from today about things that we can start to do, and how do we play a role in helping shape that next 5 years of the reforms and as we move forward. So Liz, we'll go to you first.
Thanks, Michelle. And I think for me, my sort of insight flows on really nicely from what you and Jeff were just speaking to, so you'd think that we planned it, but we really didn't. And my insight is not unique. It's something that I took from the first roundtable that we held with key sector stakeholders and our minister, where we were talking about all of these new things that we were thinking about and all of these reforms that were needed as a result of the Disability Royal Commission and the NDIS review. And some of the feedback that came back to us as part of that was, let's not talk about this as if we're starting from scratch. Let's acknowledge that we've actually had a really significant journey with the introduction of the NDIS and really significant reform over the last 10 to 15 years that we've got to build on. And we're at a really different starting point than what we were 10 to 15 years ago. And that really resonated for me, because at times it can feel hard and it can feel slow and it can be challenging when things are not going exactly the way we might like them to. But that was really an insight that kind of resonated for me and that I've taken forward, and you'll see that in the name of our Queensland Disability Reform Framework, which we've entitled The Next Chapter. And it's about how do we actually take what we now have as a good base and further improve and refine that to achieve a better outcome for people with disability in Queensland. In terms of a sort of key action, I would say for every person in the room and online, please think about how you can contribute to the reform journey we have ahead of us. It's a rare occasion for me to come out of a meeting with stakeholders or a Queensland Disability Advisory Council meeting, or just even a one-to-one chat with anyone in the sector in the disability community, without taking something new from that conversation and without me going away and thinking, I hadn't thought about it like that before, or that's something really important that we're going to have to think about. So I guess in terms of a call to action from my perspective, I would just say, have a think about how you can get involved in the co-design process moving forward, particularly in the next couple of weeks as we start to really release that strategy and get more engaged on taking things forward. Have a think about how you're going to influence in that space.
Thank you, Liz. And I think that's a really important point about that, the Disability Royal Commission is not just about the role that people with disability and families play in this change journey. It's not just about disability advocacy and disability service providers, and it's not just about the hats of those government departments and state and Commonwealth that have disability in their name or social services, but it is about all of our mainstream services and all of our community, and that's certainly what the Royal Commission has shown to us and what needs to be influenced and shaped and changed. So Luke, interested to hear your perspectives and what key things you take away and what people to think about.
Thanks, Michelle. And I think Liz stole a little bit of what I was thinking, but I think what I would say is reform and change, I think, as Jeff reflected, it can be hard. It involves, persistence and rolling up sleeves and finding areas where there's kind of common ground to make things better. Status quo is easy. Reform is hard. But what I would say is that there's a huge amount of institutional knowledge within all of the community organisations, disability organisations, and different parts of government that have done big things before in the disability community, like the NDIS and like many other areas of reform to mainstream service systems to make them more inclusive. So there is the capability and knowledge to do that. We just need to remember sort of how and what that looks like in the context that we're in today. But in terms of a call to action, I think one of the things we would encourage, we've seen through pretty much every consultation that we've ever run, and Sharon touched on this, that there are just such a diversity across the disability community, and there's lots of great passionate advocates and people with disability in this room and online who engage very actively in co-design and consultation and engagement with governments. But there's also many people who are not in this room and online who may be more hidden. And what my call to action would be is find ways through all of your networks to give opportunities to those people to also come forward and have a voice in disability reform, so that it does ultimately mean that everyone has the opportunity to engage and get involved, and that we get the solutions right for them as well as for everyone who's in the room.
Thanks, Luke. Sharon.
I had a follow on from both Liz and Luke. They've probably,
Worried.
yeah, it's hard, isn't it? The reality is that, as Liz was speaking, I was thinking that so true. There's so much information that we've got, and when we often sit at the start of a meeting or the start of a year, and you're looking at what you're going to look at, work plans, all of those, I guess, theoretical frameworks, you could call them. It's so important not to forget what has gone before, but what potential there is there in that room. And how can we engage with that potential? How can we encourage people to speak up, to share their story, to make everybody understand that they have something that's really worthwhile to say? Because I think some people, and everybody does it, you underestimate, you think, oh, that's already been mentioned, I'm not sure I know enough about that. But we need to give people permission to actually say that, to share their stories. We talk about lived experience. It's that every day. It's the talking about sometimes how difficult it is, getting up, relying on care, how to negotiate, how then to be able to link to your community, how to actually make a real difference. And everybody has something that they can give. And I think the learning for me is sometimes, as Luke was saying, there's people that are hidden that you don't even see, and you don't sometimes see their potential. They just say one thing in a room and you think, wow, I've never thought about it from that perspective. And that's what we talk about when we talk about new knowledge, new learning, building that into how we move forward. And that imagination, everybody has a different way of imagining what would work best. If we link all of those things and ideas together, it gives everybody the power in the room. And I've been thinking about this a lot recently. So often, there's one or two people that, because of the topic that's being discussed, the way it's being discussed, what maybe they think the legislation is or what they're entitled to say, sometimes they don't say it. They take their own power away. But we need to give everybody an equal power in the room and give people a chance to actually have a voice, to imagine those possibilities. If you think back to the blue sky scenario, that sort of thing. Okay, 1 minute. See, when I get a little bit of freedom with speaking, it can go out of control. So I better quickly sum up that I think my call to action, my call to action is that everybody needs to actually know that they have potential to share in this journey. There's so many different angles, stories, ways we can shape from the federal perspective, from the state perspective, from our local perspective, from our member perspective of QDL and our linkages to making sure that we share with all areas of government what we can do to make a difference, to give people with disability an equal chance in society and a future that has great possibilities.
Thank you, Sharon. Jeff,
I'll be really quick.
final words.
Final word. Listening to people talking about where we've come from as a sector, it made me think back. I left government in 1997. There are some people around the room who were also, well, they weren't necessarily leaving government at the time, but you know, they've got that very long horizon behind them in knowing where we've come from. When I left, the Queensland government was spending $165 million a year on disability services. That's directly provided and funded to the community. The Minister talked about $2.1 billion spend at the moment on the NDIS. You've come a huge way. How has that happened? People have told their story, people have been persistent. It's like eating an elephant. Take it in bite-sized pieces. Take some of the early pieces out of the year where you can see where the bites have come from, where you've made an impact. You've got a really strong track record of achievement, and I think, you know, there's some real opportunities opening up in.
Thank you. Well, thank you to our wonderful panel, to Liz, Luke, Sharon and Jeff. Thank you for your time and for sharing your perspectives and insights. And if you can all join with me to thank them while we move to our next panel.